Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Sultan Barakat, and I'm the Director of Research at the Brookings Doha Center. Tonight's event focuses on the issues that are developing within Lebanon will be conducted in Arabic. So please, those of you who cannot follow us in Arabic, the handsets are on your seats. So please take a few minutes to get yourself ready. We are also broadcasting tonight's events live on Al Jazeera Mubashir, and I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome our audience and welcome you to tonight's event. That does mean that we have to stick to the time, which is about 90 minutes of broadcast, but also it does mean that we have to be careful in the way we express ourselves in case we enter into circles of anger and shouting and so on. Certain language is not acceptable. And of course, we welcome our audiences, and they will have access to follow us on Twitter and through Facebook to send questions which we'll put to our speakers. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Sultan Barakat. I am Director of Research in Brookings Doha Center. Today, we are honored to host two experts who are very well known in the field of politics and ideas and the formation of ideas in Lebanon and the Arab world in general. To start with, we have Dr. Ahmed Musalli, who is a professor of political science in the American University of Beirut. He is specialized in political Islam and has many writings in this topic and has obtained many rewards for his books that he wrote during 20 years of experience. The latest or the most important book that obtained a reward was a book that was published 2003 in English under the Islamic Quest for Democracy, Tourism, and Human Rights from the classical to modern discourses, which speaks about the concept of political Islam, human rights, and how the West is trying to know and follow up the concept of Islamic political Islam. Dr. Musalli also obtained his PhD from Maryland University in the United States and was a visiting professor in many universities, including Pittsburgh, Chicago, and Copenhagen. And we are honored to have him with us today. He is one of the colleagues in Brookings, and we also follow up what he writes. And we also have with us Mr. Ali Hamada, who is a professor and well-known in the Arab world as a researcher, writer, journalist, editorialist in Al-Nahar newspaper, especially, where he has a column in Al-Nahar, and he is also a member of the board of directors in Nahar al-Arabi in Lebanon. Mr. Hamada is also well known for his hosting a program called Istihqaq, which used to be transmitted in the Future TV in Lebanon from 2004 to 2013. And at the present time, he is hosting and participating in several political programs on that channel. Mr. Hamada also plays an important political role in Lebanon. He is member of the General Secretariat of the 14th March movement, which is a movement known to reject the Syrian for its rejection of the the previous Syrian intervention in Lebanon. Now they say that we are intervening in Syria, and we are honored to have him with us, Mr. Ali. And after this introduction, we'll begin our discussions. So we have 90 minutes. which will begin by a couple of questions to ask our colleagues here to give us a general idea of what's happening in Lebanon. And after that, we will open the floor for your questions here, whether here the audience here or the viewers of Al Jazeera Mubashar. Those who follow us in Al Jazeera Mubashar can send us their questions through Twitter, Brookings #Lebanon. And we have here some friends who will bring me the questions. So, Lebanon has always witnessed political problems and tensions before the Syrian war, and still having this kind of tensions. But something new took place on July, where we found a number of the young people went to the streets calling, presenting demands that are not political, but calling for services such as getting rid of the garbage in the streets. And we heard there were some concessions made and agreement between this movement and the government. And as we know, these rallies and these sittings are still continuing and going on up to date in Lebanon. So this raises some new questions in Lebanon. For example, even from a services point of view, taking consideration that these young people are went to the street to ask for services, these services have always been not continuous, and whether in garbage collection or since the 90s. So why today? Why we say that in July this year, this movement began, this protest movement began at a time when there are so many things happening in Syria and there are so many foreign interventions in the region. Is there any links or relationship between this and what's going outside, what's going on outside, or is it really internally domestic affair?
شكرا دكتور، شكرا. مساء الخير للجميع، ومساء الخير أيضا للمشاهدين عبر الجزيرة مباشر. سؤالك بمحله دكتور بركات. يعني أولا كان دايما كنا نحن، وأنا عم بحكي اليوم أتحدث كصحافي، وفي كثيرين من اللبنانيين وحتى من الإخوان العرب الذين عاشوا في لبنان ودرسوا، ربما تموا دراساتهم في لبنان، كانوا يتساءلون على مدى السنوات العقود الماضية، يعني منذ السبعينات، منذ بدء الحرب مع
Since what was known as the Civil War or the War of the Others or the War by Proxy, and the late Ghassan Twaini used to say it was not a civil war, it was the war of others being fought in Lebanon. We used to ask ourselves, how could the Lebanese go out on demonstrations? If we simplify the matter and use simple language, how can they find the enthusiasm for a cause with a sectarian dimension? When something happens in another Arab country, then people gather together in their thousands or tens of thousands. I'm talking about the period before 1975, that is when the Palestinian cause and other Arab causes were in the forefront. And I often pose this question in my writings, in my articles. I used to ask, how could the Lebanese in their tens of thousands come out in demonstrations for a sectarian demand and not at the same time be able to go out calling for simple, basic, safe services? The Lebanese over the last 4 decades have learned how to live with the idea that the public sector or the state there, and they had their own little private state. Like, for example, instead of the national utilities, electricity being provided by the utilities, they had their own little generators. The television was, there was the state television and the general services, but at the same time you had cable channels which we used to steal from and without paying any royalties. And I hope Al Jazeera will forgive me for saying this. The question was always posed, why couldn't the Lebanese get together and go out on demonstration demanding the services which should be there made available in their minimum? The Lebanese uh, now are demonstrating against electricity problems, against collecting garbage and refuse. This is the same Lebanon which used to be referred to as the Garden of Eden in the East. We have enough and sufficient water sources, but most of it goes to waste because rainwater is not utilized through the building of dams or others. For 6 months of the year, the Lebanese go thirsty and pay to buy water, pay for tankers to bring water into their homes. This, of course, on top of that comes corruption, and at all levels, the higher and the lower levels, and all the aspects of public life in Lebanon. Of course, disrespect of the law and simple things to more elaborate things. The Lebanese have failed to find common denominators to unite them outside the confessional or the sectarian aspect. The new thing that we are witnessing since the beginning of summer of this year, that we are, it was as if we were fast asleep and we woke up in June because of the refuse and garbage problem, and I'm sure people may be aware of the situation. There were contracts with a private country, the company, and the contract expired, but the government was not able to sign a new contract with a company, so the contract ran out, and the Lebanese woke up to the fact that their streets are full of garbage. Then they discovered there was a huge problem in the country. This kind of protest movements represented by civil society organizations, of course, have a long history in their struggle, but they were not able in the past to bring together more than few individuals in any protest movement. They tried that over the question of the extension of the parliament, and you know the parliament has extended its own term, and we know the problem with the presidency. There's been more than a year and the country is without a president. I'm a journalist before anything else. We are still asking ourselves this question: what made the Lebanese wake up? Have they woken up because now the garbage is gathering outside their homes and therefore this is an immediate problem? I don't know. The protest movement has expanded, and now it's supported by a larger audience. In the Lebanon, I call that the force of public opinion, because the 8th of March movement is the movement which allies itself with Syria, Iran, and other countries, the Shiites, and in opposition you have the 14th of March and on the 29th of August, and for the first time in Lebanon's modern history since 1975, that is, we saw huge demonstrations going out onto the streets made up of civil people who do not have any political affiliation, neither sectarian or political, went out by their own will to shout that enough is enough. We can no longer tolerate the sick reality the country is living in. Yes, there is a struggle, there is division on major issues, but at the same time, the Lebanese are dying by installment, as it were. And this is a phenomenon, and a phenomenon which we have not yet found a satisfactory answer. No, the puzzle has not completed yet. We haven't found all the pieces for this jigsaw. Dr. Ahmed maybe will help us complete this jigsaw now.
شو موقف الأحزاب
What is the position of the political parties nowadays from this movement? Does this have some political origins, or as Mr. Ali said, in fact, his description is very exact, in fact. Today, we find that all the political powers, forces, including 14th of March and 8th and March, after having tried to contain these movements or this movement of demands, there were some attempts to go into the streets with them or to bring them to one side on the account of the others. All these attempts failed, even with the Aoun movement, who had always thought that he represents the demands of a big group of the people. That's thinking about the services demands. All the forces consider or think that the emergence of a force that is not sectarian, not political, is a threat to all the political forces in the country. If we just have a fast review of the changes, we see that Lebanon has always been under sectarianism, and there is a political class that most of which is corrupt. So that I don't say all, but I say most, so that everyone can exclude himself. Most of this political class are very much corrupt. And some of them in the electricity sector, others in the water sector, others in the garbage, the customs, the airport, etc. So the government of the different governments in Lebanon since the Taif agreement to today are all governments that have made of corruption the cornerstone of the governmental action and political action in the country. We find that Lebanon today is made of different sects, ethnicities, and that can be summarized or concentrated in only 12 or dozen of people who work within this their own customers. I remember when I came back from America after obtaining my PhD, I asked my friends, where should I work? So they told me you should go to the chief of your sect. I told them I don't have any belongs or adherence to any. They said this is not important. The important thing is that you go and speak to the chief of the sect or the head of the sect. So everybody must do so. That's why the Lebanese nowadays feel that there is something wrong, a big thing wrong, not only in the politics, but in all other things. The garbage problem was just a sign, or just a sign that, or a bubble that exploded in the face of the government to prove that the government can do nothing, including garbage collection. All the movements of demands were aborted in the past. For example, there was a movement of the taxi drivers. They tried to agree with the government, but it was undermined because each taxi driver is part of this or that group of people or sect. That's why this movement, this present one, is a surprise, in fact, was a surprise to all the others. What I know, and I spoke to many people about this, that everybody are against this movement because it threatens their private and public interests. It threatens the government structure, and more than that, the political structure of the state of Lebanon. You know, in Lebanon, and unfortunately, I say that Iraq is working on the same way, and Syria is also will follow. Unfortunately, I say that instead of having Lebanon getting out of this, the other countries are following suit. Because everything now depends on which sect you are part of. The structure of the constitution and the state and are all based on sectarism. So now we find that we are facing a group of people, young people, who are try, according to their bad smell or you stink movement, and who should we hold accountable. Such movements have an objective or a goal that can be sympathized with by all the Lebanese people. 3 days ago, and Mr. Ali can explain this better than me, 3 days ago, there was a very strong action was taken to put an end to this movement and what it represents. That's why we are now about to see a sort of oppression of this movement, but which we wish it had succeeded, so that it rids us of sectarism and corruption. I would like to salute these young people for facing and scanting against corruption. We know that $30 billion were paid to provide electricity in Lebanon, but nevertheless, there is no electricity in Lebanon. I live in a place where we have to be out $500, and other than the other $300 that's paid to the government to obtain electricity. So in Lebanon, I pay $800 monthly to obtain electricity. So a lot of money is being paid, and when oil prices go down, the electricity prices go up. You know, the oil prices in the world went down to the half, but the electricity prices, instead of going down, they went up. This is something not explicable and cannot be rational. So the question is really puzzling, and it's puzzling everybody, in fact. I don't think that it is a real puzzle in the sense that one cannot solve. Some say that those who are in this movement represent the different embassies, the American embassy, the French embassy, or the Qatari or the Saudi embassies, so the Emirates, etc. Okay. They accuse them that they want to create in Lebanon a new, a black Arab Spring, as the one we saw in other Arab countries. In fact, in Lebanon, everybody receives and gets salaries from embassies. 8 and 14 March do receive money from different embassies. So being paid by one government or another is part of the game in Lebanon, and Lebanese are reached a stage that they cannot solve their internal domestic conflicts because it's so much related to Iraq, Syria, and to the regional balances between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And what's even worse, that there's this the balance of power between Russia and USA. So when we cannot elect a president because his election is related to all these things, to Syria, to Iraq, to Iran, to Saudi, the regional balance. That's why I think that this movement was the natural product, but in the past there was no Syrian refugees. You know, in Lebanon, which has a population of 4.5 million people, 500,000 of them are Palestinians. They are all the refugees. And there's 1.5 million Syrians. And that nation says 1.2. These are the registered refugees, but there are bigger numbers that are not registered. So let's say the figure is 1.5 million. We welcome them, they're most welcomed, but they put pressure on electricity, they put pressure on water consumption, on even on job opportunities. The age group of the young people who are going to the streets are not my age. Not our group. No, we are already well established. No, the age group of the people who are going to the streets now, who they represent a real protest movement, But I think what happened that was not there in the past is that today you find the work or job opportunities that were available for this age group of people. For example, accountant in a company was taken by this Syrian, an electrician was taken by Syrian, a chef in the cuisine was taken by Syrian. So we find that there are a sort of categories of professions were taken by the Syrians, and consequently, many Lebanese are not cannot find job opportunities, and we find that we find all the United Nations and other countries have not supported or helped the Syrians in a real way in Lebanon. For example, we have the number of students in schools of Lebanon, the Syrian ones, are bigger than the number of Lebanese students in the schools. The Syrians are more than the Lebanese students. That's why they have a special attendance time after the afternoon for the Syrians. This requires more teachers, equipment, etc. This means that if you want to make any repair works in your house, you will find the worker who comes to your house is a Syrian. This, of course, means more pressure on the Lebanese youth or young people. I'm not against the Syrians working in Lebanon, but I think this issue needs to be tackled or solved by the government, because most of the Lebanese youth are unemployed. And you find then came the issue of the garbage, that in such a way that at the front door of each house there was the garbage, and the city was smelling so bad that it stinks. That's why I think this movement, whether there's someone behind it pushing it, but it's a good movement, a right movement, but it is about to come to its end.
In other words, this protest movement has its roots and is not necessarily motivated by outside forces, because there are enough internal forces behind it. So far, the state is talking about opening channels of communications for a national dialogue to find alternatives to solve the garbage collection problem. And what we notice is most political parties act as if they are against this political agitation by the protest movement. Is this your conclusion? In my opinion, the national dialogue will lead to nothing at this stage because there are preconditions that have to be there which are not there. For example, electing a president needs two-thirds of the parliament, and this has brought the democratic process into a complete halt. In other countries, if you want a majority of two-thirds for the second attempt, they find alternatives like 50 plus 1. For example, the 8th of March movement has one nominee, and that is General On. They're not going to give up on. The other camp now are nominating Samir Ja'ja to burn the chances of General On. The mechanisms used by Parliament to elect President are incorrect because the Speaker of the Parliament, Nabih Berri, and his office require that the vast majority of the MPs to be present. So everybody knows this, and especially those who closely follow events. The law or the legal system in Lebanon is an opinion. It's not a text which should be respected. Law is an opinion, as they say, a point of view. For this reason, some camps in Lebanon see that you can elect a president with 50 plus 1, the absolute majority. Others say, no, you have to have two-thirds of the members of parliament because the Lebanese situation is based on the relationship between the different factions and sects. So this starts with the presidency, and then it spreads around into appointment to public office and the election of the appointment of the cabinet, etc., etc. The problem in the Lebanon is that even nationalism or patriotism is a point of view. Treason is a point of view. One camp can call another camp traitors, in inverted commas, and the others say they are killers and murderers, etc. The others see them as patriots. Even with the presence of a text which can be referred to as a point of reference, and this is the frightening thing about Lebanon, even with the presence of a conclusive, clear-cut text, we still have points of view governing the situation. What is the reason that makes political power stretch this concept so far, so much so that they can make a 160-degree turn in their opinion? So is confessionalism and sectarianism taking the country into a point that we cannot function? It's totally dysfunctional now. Yes, it's true. There are points of view. For example, for most Arabs and Muslims, dealing with Israel is not a point of view that you can agree or disagree on. This is treason. For example, interference in Syria can be a different matter. Some people may approve and others disapprove. This is another matter. But the situation in the Lebanon and the crisis of the system itself, because it is confessional and sectarian, and if you leave these groups represented by General On on one side, or the Hezbollah, or the future trend, Tayal Mustaqbal, or Walid Jumblat, or others, big names, I think the situation may end up in total collapse, and we'll end up in a situation of civil war. The system which is there is which is written or enshrined in the constitution, which can be restored. But in fact, the real de facto system is different because they have to divide everything according to a quota system. Even collecting garbage, it seems, has to be divided that each party should collect one bit. You have a written constitution which is not being implemented, and there is an unwritten code or constitution which is really implemented. This is the makeup of the structure governing Lebanon. It's amazing, isn't it? This is a country with all these problems, yet life goes on. Yes, for us observers from the outside, we think this is no less than a miracle, and thank heavens for that. Ustad Ali, please give us an idea of what are the demands by this agitation, this movement. What they have made contacts. What are the solutions they are presenting? They're proposing in view of the current political climate in the country, which is probably one of the most complex. In other countries like Jordan, the protest movement has waned to a great degree because people do not want to see the situation ending up in a situation like Syria or other countries. The Lebanese situation is different for those who are familiar with Lebanon and its affairs. Now, our situation is totally different than all Arab countries. Why, you may ask? In any other countries, when people took to the streets during the Arab Spring, people used to shout, the people want to change the system, depose the government. When we heard the civil protest movement in the Lebanon, we used to ask them, which system do you want to depose? Well, tell us where it is. There is no system, there is no regime you want to depose. If you tell us where we can find it, we will work together to dispose. It's not a system as such. There is a written code, a constitution, which is not applied or implemented. There is an unwritten constitution which is being applied. When we talk about the political regime in the Lebanon or the political system, one of our colleagues at An-Nahar newspaper, his name is Sarkis Naum, is a seasoned political commentator. In his writings talks about the peoples of Lebanon in the plural, and he doesn't even use the term different sects or confessions or regions. He says peoples of Lebanon. So therefore, the Lebanese state of affairs is really strange. This protest movement has contributed to the Lebanese people's waking up to alarm bells ringing, and we can differ on our position regarding Bashar al-Assad or Saudi Arabia or Iran. Even there is differences on documenting our history. People who stood by the side of the Palestinian resistance movement and those who asked Israel's help to fight the Palestinian resistance movement. It seems to me that the bigger question here is, where are we heading to? How far can they go? Can they achieve their aims and objectives? This is a big question.
Is it what is their demand? Is it only solving the problem of garbage? In fact, there are so many slogans and demands were submitted and presented. But what made this civil movement explode is really the garbage issue. because it was reached an unsupportable degree. And when they went into the streets, there were different slogans. Some of them went put an end to the regime. Some of them want presidential elections, then parliamentary ones. Some called for putting an end to Tamam Salam, the head of the government, and the Minister of Environment, Mohammed Mashru, and the Minister of Interior. Then some said that no, we want parliamentary elections to correct the situation in Lebanon, then have presidential one. Then they disagreed. Then all these demands were withdrawn. All these slogans were withdrawn also, because the forces inside this movement differed amongst themselves about their priorities, and then they reorganized that by putting first demand and the head of the list, their list of demands, the issue of garbage, then issues such as electricity, water, and other sectors. Here, I just express my own personal point of view. I think that this movement is important and has contributed in awakening the people, but so far it still has a long way before it, because the Lebanese sectarian composition, its mafia composition, its political composition is much, much stronger, and the other side is capable of observing this movement, although there's a big media coverage that gives it a strong impetus. There are some TV channels that covering this movement in the streets directly for hours and hours. But that's not enough. Tomorrow, one of the head of one of the big parties, political parties, with the X or Y party, might call to a manifestation rally under a big slogan with political ideas that might confront other parties. This might bring together 100,000 people to the streets, and there will be possibility of confrontations and fighting. What drew the attention of people is not only that this movement, but the reaction of the state to the level of using violence against the people. Had the reaction been less rough, some people say that the action was rough. I say, so I used to go. When I was student in France, when we went into the streets in Paris, and there was just a little confrontation with the security forces in Paris. We were beaten by the police in the country which is the mother of all democracies. But these people were there, the streets, for in the middle of Beirut for weeks for sectarian reasons, but they weren't beaten up. 2005, remember, Doctor, on the 8th of March, 500 or 600,000 people went to the streets, led by Mr. Hassan Nasrallah, and nothing happened in Riyadh Salt Square. A few days after that, the other side was against the Syrian guardianship, and that's the 14th of March group took to the streets with about 1 million persons. So there was no problem at all, no confrontation. So the question is, what's the difference between that case and the present day? I think that what was said is correct, but I think the dangerous part of this movement that the people are threatening the authorities itself. That's Hezbollah and Mustaqbal, the future, are part of the power, ruling power. So when they go to the streets, they want only to get some gains here or there. While as these young people went to the streets, this movement, their objective is not to go into any settlements with the power or the authorities, so to the extent that they refused to meet with the head of the government, Tamam Salam, who called them to a meeting. or it's also the authorities are not capable of respecting and providing their demands, or because since they went to the city so far, the crisis or this problem of garbage was not solved. In addition to other, if we just put aside all the political issues outside the election of president, of new parliament, etc., the demands of the people are real and righteous ones, and people are sympathizing with them. Even those who are from one party or the other sympathize with this demand calling for the collection and getting rid of the garbage. Even Mr. Tawasliman spoke of political garbage, so accusing the other parties, political party, of being corrupt and stinking. At the same time, they go to meet the same and they agree about how to share, or what shares take of this piece of cake, or one takes the south, the other takes the north, one Beirut, and this also includes the electricity. In Lebanon, the political parties or class exchange accusations, each one saying that the other side is agents of other foreign forces. One says that these are the agents of the Zionists, and the other say, no, you are the agents of Iran. But at the end of the day, they meet at the same table of negotiation, and they forget all about these accusations. So they don't even have any differences amongst them. So they might differ about how to face Israel, but they don't they accuse each other of being corrupt, or that they have, most of them at least. Those people. It's important that one of the wrong things or the negative aspects of this movement is that in the beginning they were more daring and more stronger, because they used to accuse everybody without any fears. But after a certain moment, we found they were beginning to have some fears, and they were beginning to be afraid of might being threatened. Or I'll give you a simple example here. Mr. Mohammed Mashrou, who is the Minister of Environment, a very good gentleman, academic person, in his ministry he did not succeed, and this is unfortunate. His ministry was occupied and attacked and occupied, and there was a long story, and so the people called for his resignation. Muhammad Jou is a very peaceful person, so he sat in his office. At the end of the day, he came out of the gate and went home without saying anything. So I asked one of the leaders of this movement, why did you get into the Ministry of Environment in this way, while as he does not have the right, or cannot really resign for political balances or reasons? So I told them, why don't you go to the house of Mr. Nabih Barri, or the Hreik, or where the headquarters of Hezbollah, who are part of the political structure? Why don't you go into the ministries that are run by one of the ministers of Jumbalat? Because it's true that in these past years he is acting like a Gandhi, but he is nevertheless a warlord, and he has very, very influential in his own sect. So they said, we cannot attack these people or these places. And if you remember, in one of the TV channels in Lebanon, there was a picture of all the political Lebanese leaders saying that all these are corrupt people, in a talk show that was run in the Riyadh Sulh Square. In this picture, there was also the image of Hassan Nasrallah. A number of the supporters of Hezbollah attacked them and swear against the presenter, the lady Rima Saleh, and threatened that if you don't remove that image, you will break down all the studio. They did have to do so. And another time, one of the activists had a personal problem. He's a nice man. He branded a slogan against Nabih Berri, saying that he's the head of corruption, and so they put an image of also Walid Jumblat and Saad Hariri. So the supporter of Saad Hariri are not fighters, are not, they don't go to the streets, but Walid Jumblat had taken the decision not to go into confrontations in the street, and he has decided so. But a number of the Amal movement supporters and began beating that man in such a way that, and then the other rally, and after a few days, the same person tried to put up the image of Nabih Berri, but he was attacked by his own colleagues and his friends, and he was kicked out of the rally. So this gives you an idea about the movement of demands. When they want to be correct, they must be grave and go to the end of the line and not try to make compromises. This is their weak point. Yes, there must be a sort of not giving the arena to persons or individuals because there are corrupt people all over the place. As for Mr. Mohammed Mashnood, Minister of Environment, the reason is that he is the minister in charge of garbage, but this is not his own problem. He's been there only for 1 year. I know him, he's my friend. Even Tamam is not a problem. This is a problem that's been inherited from previous governments. But they are now in power. They represent the power in the country. And I think no minister will be allowed to resign because if he resigns, any minister, this means that might be a threat against the power because this is not something not allowable. That's why we will see a counter movement soon. What I'm saying is an important factor that this movement has reached a level after which it cannot grow any larger because the polarization. Now, I spoke to many people from different tendencies and movements, and they said that these young people, these are supported by the Americans or so and so. So they begin to have some fears that these might push us into some difficulties. And the other thing is that this move is not getting any bigger. It cannot bring more than 15,000 people in the best of cases. So we find that, and I think the reason behind this is this that every one of the people, of these people, want different things. They don't have a unified vision, unified demands. So there are so many things that if this movement wants to be to have a future, they must change into a real movement and must have an action program. They cannot go into the city and say we'll break out everything down because we want electricity. We'll break out everything around the country because we want water or electricity, etc. And the state, or the government, let's say, not the state, the government, represented by Ministry of Interior and Justice, is using strength and violence against the strength and arresting them and putting them into trials. 2 days ago, some of them were even sent to the military tribunal. So this is unfortunate. Of course, in Lebanon, we have a military tribunal for only military affairs. But all these people are being sent to the military tribunal. My own son went into and joined this movement, and this was his first time in any rally. He was beaten severely. He was hit on his head, on his back, everywhere. because he did not listen to me. Anyhow, they were sent to the military tribunal, which is not the proper. In Lebanon, we say that if you hit or have a collision with a military car, you might send you to the military tribunal. This is a law that that goes back to the wartime. That's why I think the state or the government, no, sorry, not the government would face these people in a very tough way in the coming period in order to put an end to any movement that might lead to weakening the power or the authority, which is weak but unified in their interests against the Lebanese people.
One last question before we open the floor for questions and answers. Is there any possibility when it comes to the basic services now should be nationalized and brought back under the control of the state? Like, for example, in Italy, in southern Italy, when this happened, people took over the ownership of refuse collection service. The shortest answer is no. No way. Okay. That's not feasible at all. Now we take some questions and comments from the floor. Thank you very much. My name is Khalid Al-Hurub. You're famous, Khalid, well known. I have two observations, not a question as such. One is related to the metaphor we are accustomed to. Every time we hear the name of Lebanon mentioned for the last 50 years, someone says now it's the future of the country is hanging in the balance, and it's like the balance is being held by outside powers. But it seems to me that whatever the reasons behind this metaphor, the situation remains as it is. And the situation is obviously born out of the dual allegiances by different powers and sects, and so much so that this situation has created its own balance of power. But when we had the Arab Spring situation, we found that this revolutionary trend was weak. It couldn't impose its will or rule the country or defend itself. So therefore, if we want to reach a situation where we have a secularist civil systems of government, we need a few generations. But at least Lebanon has entered that process. The other observation is why what happened has happened with the garbage collection problem. In all Arab countries, there is an accumulation of political, social, economic stress points. When Bouazizi set light to himself and burned himself, it was the trigger, really. The Lebanon, the situation. So just show me where the system is. You refer to a system. By the way, I just want to make a small comment that those who are more seasoned than us, when it comes to this question of everything hanging in the balance, the Arabic metaphor is like as if the whole country is in the hands of a genie. Or we may remember the leader of the reformist movement in the Lebanon since the establishment of the Republic of Lebanon. Has called Erford, who was the head of a diplomatic mission or a mission to present him with a report on the current situation prevalent at that time as to how the Lebanese situation can be reformed. Of course, there were many suggestions. Some were put into practice at the level of the public administration, but the president asked the head of the mission at the time, this Lebanon, this country, is not that abnormal. He said, what can I do to... this is a well-known story. He said to him, Mr. President, don't do anything. Leave Lebanon as it is. Do not touch anything. Few reforms here at the official level, like civil society, etc., civil service, or the auditing part of the state. Otherwise, leave Lebanon to its own devices. This was in early 1960s. Yes, he left it to its own devices and we ended up with civil war. This is what we've been talking about, the question of stability in Lebanon. Lebanon, despite all this, now we see a bloodbath in Syria, a bloodbath in Iraq and Palestine, we all know. Egypt is a dire situation, Libya, Yemen, Turkey now, the latest explosions, and Lebanon, despite all this deep distrust and the divisions between almost every faction and every other, also the level of arms in Lebanese society. The Lebanese are all armed, by the way, and yet the country is still quiet and has not exploded yet. It may be stable, it is calm without any prospects for the future, maybe. Also, this refers to comments made earlier. The Lebanese state is not frightened with all that's happening and Hezbollah's involvement in the fighting in Syria. Isn't it fearful of Lebanon entering the civil war? And why hasn't the state in Lebanon deployed the army to collect the garbage? Mr. Ali saying similarly to what the National Guard does in the U.S. But you have to tell me first what Lebanese state, where I pose a question, where is the state? Half of it is owned by Hezbollah, the other half is owned by Hezbollah's opponents, the other part is with Syria, the regime, and the other part is with the opponents of the Syrian regime. This division is creating a negative balance in the political structure of Lebanon. We have no qualms with who will end up collecting the garbage. Our problem is where can we dump them once they are collected. Nobody, they divided the garbage dumps because everything in Lebanon is divided according to the quota system and factionalism and sectarianism. So therefore there is some sort of an equilibrium, a system, but it's not the correct political system according to the constitution. For example, electing the president or the garbage collecting, there is no total collapse or breakdown because the political class with all its divisions is united on one thing, that they all have a share in the system as it is. Because Lebanon has its own political system, its own economic system, and parallel systems within the system itself. So, we had a civil war for 15 years, and I don't think anybody wants to go back to that experience because everybody will end up on the losing side, and we are still governed by the warlords. And the vast majority of them are warlords, the political leaders. Also, the collective memory of the Lebanese people, of course, which is another factor. Uh, we want to create now trouble and export it to the area. Please, microphone to Dr. Haider. Thank you very much. My name is Haider Saeed from the Arab Center for Research. I'm an Iraqi, and when it comes to sectarian quota, I know, being an Iraqi, what you're talking about. Now there was an agreement almost by everybody that this kind of quota system based on sectarianism is the most likely cause for producing a failed state. But where does the solution lie? I don't see the Lebanese discussing the the political system itself. Do you want a new Taif agreement? You seem to be more preoccupied with Lebanon's relationship to regional issues. In Iraq, we say the same thing. We need some sort of flexibility in the system, and it's not just criticizing the sectarian regime, but finding an alternative. And the problem with this system, Hezbollah itself uses different formulas. Maybe the solution lies in other alternatives. The other point is, for example, the problem of electing a president is not the result of sectarianism. It is the problem of Christian division between the Christian factions, because each faction or each group, each Christian group, has its own take on the situation.
In the name of God, the title of this session is this Lebanese internal crisis, but we focused on garbage only. What I can say that this business or this crisis of garbage exists in all the Arab countries, but the problem is in how to recycle this garbage in the ruling class in our countries, because all our ruling class are garbage that need to be recycled. And another thing, my friend Musalli, that the petrol prices went up. What at the same time, what we have that this affected Egypt 10 times more than this affects on Lebanon. So my question, when you spoke about it's a shame to cooperate with Israel, and cooperating with Russia is more than a shame. So let's call for getting rid of all foreign forces from Syria, Daesh, Hezbollah, and Russia, so that the problem in Lebanon can be solved. And the other point is, why shouldn't be brave enough and say that there should be direct election of the president of the Republic between Michel Aoun and Georgia? Why don't you call for that? I can answer your second question. Okay, let's begin with this. Okay, Mr. The issue of the direct election by the people in Lebanon is unfortunately something impossible in Lebanon. The reason is that the sectarian differences and divide in the country is so strong that any president of the republic, for example, any president of the republic, given the democratic situation that was explained by the gentleman from Iraq, that there are demographic changes in Lebanon. The Christians, if you want to know, practically speaking, those who of them who have stayed in Lebanon are no more than 30%. 70% are Muslims. So direct election means the president of Lebanon who the will not be chosen by the Christians. They they can bring not Michel Aoun or Ja'ja, they can bring Tannous al-Duwayhi and make him a president of the republic without any one of us knowing who this man is, this 70% of the Muslims. So the direct elections in Lebanon is something very dangerous and cannot be applied, or it's not applicable in Lebanon because the Taif formula is that the demography of the 1990s was agreed upon by the Arabs and the international that Lebanon will be in two parts. Considering that half of the population is Muslims, the other half is Christians, while in fact two-thirds of the people, if not three-quarters, are Muslims, and only 1/4 have stayed in Lebanon. Who are registered. The other Christians immigrated, left the country. So we want to keep Lebanon the way it is, dreaming that it is divided in two populations. The issue of this division between the Christians. What I want to say is that this consensus sectarian system will not lead to nowhere. Lebanon is a unique experience, in fact, and it failed. It was not successful. The power sharing on sectarian basis was not succeed. As the gentleman said, in 20 years or 25 years, we will find, and for different reasons, but hope not, but let's say the Christians in the Lebanon will be only 15%. The system will not stay, will not remain. That's why if you don't change the idea of citizenship and make it the basis of dealing with the state, with all its problems, otherwise it will mean we're heading to new explosions and the crisis will not be solved. We find that some Christians saying we want our share in the state. Okay, but you have your share, and the president of the republic and the central bank president and others must be Christians. But these things are heading to an explosion. As we saw in Iraq, there are this consensus between the Shiites and Sunnis, ethnicities. This means we are building a future that's explosive in Iraq. And if they do the same thing in Syria, this will also lead to explosion. That's why the situation of the Arab Mashriq Orient cannot continue the way it is. That's why what the Americans did, the first thing they did in Iraq, they destroyed the state of Iraq, not Saddam, but the central state of Iraq. They were supposed to undertake some reforms, some openings, some democracy, some parliamentary life, but they put an end to everything. We saw the same thing in Libya, and this is not the solution. The reproduction of the authority under titles of Shiites and Sunnis means that you're making of Iraq a sort of explosion bomb. Many people go to Islamic State because they are afraid that the Shiites will control Iraq and they will have the final word. And this applies to Syria and maybe to Lebanon in the coming period. That's why the constitutional, conventional, sectarian system, horrific as he says, this system will lead to the explosion of the region even to a larger extent. The Islamic State, Jabhat al-Nusra, and some groups in the north of Lebanon are being fed by this sectarian conflicts. Hezbollah went to Syria to kill the Sunnis, as they say. That's why we will create some extremist groups, even if they are with the ISIL, they must be against the Shiites and to fight the Shiites. This is the present situation today. That's why I'm against. I hope that, unfortunately, we advised that Iraq should not be, the state of Iraq should not be destroyed when the Americans went in. But I one of the people who made a study of research about that before the American entry. And I think the decision of USA was a conscious one. Bremer made his decision. It's not that he didn't understand politics. No, the decision came from the highest levels. And if you read many researches that are there, the think tanks are published now, there is a plan to divide the Arab Mashriq, the Orient, into smaller states that are ethnic states, an Alawite state, a Shiite Alawi state, a Sunnite state, a Kurdish state, a Durzi. What did Erdogan want from the Arab region? He wanted to protect the Sunnis in the north by expanding Turkey and accept. That's why we are now at a very delicate stage. Maybe in Lebanon we are least threatened because we have this strong of sectarianism, and this comes from animosities between different parts. But Lebanon has the advantage of the Taif agreement, which is not being implemented, but the political action in Syria, in Lebanon, should not be political, and all the sectarianism should be discussed in the Senate, but this was not applied as was stipulated in the Taif committee. All they did was creating a committee to study how to put an end to sectarism. So they reject even to undertake a study on this. That's why the solution in Lebanon is there, but must need to be implemented. That's to say, the Taif agreement, because there are so many things that will change the situation. For example, separation of the judicial system from politics. In Lebanon, the judicial system are afraid of the politics because the political powers that appoint the judges and also the other powers. So in Lebanon, there is an agreement that should be implemented, while in Iraq still needs more work than in Lebanon. And Iraq is this big country that has petroleum resources, and it's part of the conflict of the Gulf region, while Lebanon is a marginal part of this conflict. We are happy to announce that we have some petrol. Maybe we'll send it to you to see. It has already been divided into 10 parts. The region where the petrol was discovered has been divided into 10 parts. So I hope it stays under in the sea. Last question, and then we have to conclude. One of the viewers says the Russian intervention in Syria, is it in the interest of the stability of Lebanon or is it against the stability of Lebanon? The Russian intervention in Syria, for a simple reason, is not in the interest of Lebanon. Because in Lebanon there is a vertical division about the Syrian crisis. The Lebanese are divided, whether political powers or citizens. Some of them are with the regime and its ramifications, Russia and the others, and the other part are with the revolution in Syria. I, for example, I am with the other part, that's the revolution. But there's a sort of understanding in Lebanon that despite all these divisions, we want to calm down and we want a sort of truce. We cannot reach a settlement or a solution, but at least we have some internal dictated principles that avoid confrontations in Lebanon. As you remember, I was too young at the civil war in Lebanon, and of the 17 years, it began by a male by shooting on a post office in Ain Rumman in Lebanon. About 15 people were killed at the time. It began this way, and so it began in 1975 and continued to 1990. So I would like to end with within 20 seconds and they say to all the Arab countries, to all people in the Arab world about civil wars. We every couple of weeks we would to say we tell our people saying next Tuesday the war will come to an end. In June 76 there is a solution and there will be ceasefire in Lebanon. We used to hear such things, but the war continued for 17 years. One knows how the war begins, but one never knows how it will end and when it will end. And those who are weak in the beginning of the war are not necessarily the weaker ones and the losing ones at the end of the war. Thank you very much, Mr. Ali, and thank you, Dr. Ahmed. I want to say just one word. We have not found solutions, at least the things. I'd like to say just one thing about Russia. The American weakness and not being able to decide, have a decisive position in the region. Remember, since Iraq and then all the other crises, even in Syria and even in Egypt and Libya, the policy of the United States was dismantled, was weak, and could not contain the situation. That's why the Russian intervention might change the geostrategic game in the region. Of course, Russia cannot be compared to Israel in any way, but if you love Israel, you are in a problem. Thank you very much for attendance, and we thank the viewers of Al Jazeera Mubashir. Next Tuesday to the 20th of October at 6 o'clock, we have another event in the Hilton Hotel that will focus on the U.S. policies in the Middle East and what Obama has achieved so far. So people are talking about the coming elections. We forget that he's been there in power. So if you're interested, you're welcome to come the 20th of October at 6 o'clock in the Hilton. Thank you. Thank you.